The loneliness men don't talk about after 60 isn't loud. It doesn't usually show up as despair or obvious sadness. It doesn't always look like isolation in the way people imagine loneliness is supposed to look. More often, it arrives quietly, slowly, almost politely. And that's part of why it's so easy to dismiss. It shows up in longer stretches of silence, in fewer conversations that feel personal, in days that pass without a sense of being truly known by anyone. And because it doesn't arrive as a crisis, many men don't name it as loneliness at all. They tell themselves they're just independent now, or private, or used to their own company. And sometimes that's true. Solitude can be peaceful. But solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. For many men after 60, there's a specific kind of loneliness that lives beneath the surface. It's not about having no one around. It's about having fewer places where you feel emotionally present, understood, and connected. One reason this loneliness goes unspoken is generational. Many men in this stage of life were never taught to talk about emotional absence. They were taught to endure it, to manage it quietly, to carry on without complaint. Loneliness wasn't framed as something to explore or share. It was framed as something to tolerate. So instead of saying, "I feel lonely," men learned to say nothing. Another reason loneliness often deepens after 60 is that life naturally becomes quieter. Work roles change or end. Daily structures dissolve. The casual interactions that once came built into routines disappear. Colleagues fade out of your life. Small conversations vanish. The steady hum of social contact thins out. What replaces it is often more silence than expected. This can be especially jarring for men who spent much of their life being busy. Men who define themselves through responsibility, through being needed, through showing up for others. When those demands lessen, there's relief, yes, but also disorientation. You're no longer pulled outward by obligation in the same way, and if you don't intentionally replace that connection, the absence becomes noticeable. There's also the loneliness that comes from changing family dynamics. Children grow up, they build lives of their own. Contact becomes less frequent, even when love remains strong. Friends move away, become ill, or pass on. Social circles shrink naturally over time, and no one really prepares men for how cumulative this can feel. It's rarely one loss that creates loneliness. It's many small losses layered quietly over years, each one manageable on its own. Together, heavy. Another layer of loneliness after 60 comes from feeling unseen. Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle one. Fewer people ask how you're really doing. Conversations become more functional. You're expected to be stable, capable, and fine. There's an assumption that if you've made it this far, you must have it figured out. But inner life doesn't stop evolving at 60. Questions don't disappear, doubts don't vanish, emotional needs don't shut off. They simply become less visible to others and often less acknowledged by the men experiencing them. Many men also experience loneliness in romantic terms after 60, whether they talk about it or not. Divorce, widowhood, or long periods of emotional distance can leave a gap that feels hard to name. Dating later in life can feel confusing or exhausting. The rules have changed. The culture feels unfamiliar. The vulnerability required can feel greater, not less. So some men withdraw, not because they don't want connection, but because the path to it feels unclear. That withdrawal can look like contentment from the outside, and sometimes even feel like contentment at first. But over time, the lack of intimacy becomes harder to ignore. There is also a loneliness tied to identity. For decades, many men anchored their sense of self in roles: provider, worker, protector, problem solver. When those roles change or recede, a quiet question can surface. Who am I now? And perhaps more quietly still, who needs me now? When you no longer feel needed in the ways you once were, it can create a hollow feeling that isn't about people being absent, but about purpose, feeling less defined. This kind of loneliness doesn't always feel emotional. Sometimes it feels existential. Another reason men don't talk about this loneliness is that it doesn't match the stereotype. Loneliness is often portrayed as dramatic or desperate, but the loneliness after 60 is usually calm on the surface. You may function well, you may stay busy, you may take care of yourself. And yet, there's a sense of emotional quiet that feels too quiet, too much time with your own thoughts, too few moments of genuine connection. Men also carry loneliness from being the strong one for so long. When you've spent decades being the person others leaned on, it can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe, to lean outward yourself. You may not know how to ask for connection without feeling like a burden. You may not know how to express need without feeling exposed, so you don't. And over time, self-reliance turns into isolation. What makes this loneliness particularly complicated is that it often exists alongside gratitude. You may be thankful for your life, your health, your history, and that gratitude can make it harder to admit emptiness. You might think, I shouldn't feel this way. I have a lot to be thankful for. But gratitude and loneliness can coexist. One does not cancel out the other. Another quiet truth is that many men after 60 feel lonely not because they lack people, but because they lack depth. They have acquaintances, familiar faces, polite interactions, but fewer places where they feel fully known. Depth requires vulnerability, and vulnerability was not encouraged for most men growing up. So connection stays surface level even when contact exists. The loneliness deepens not from absence of people, but from absence of being understood. This is why advice like just stay busy often misses the point. Activity doesn't replace intimacy. Motion doesn't replace meaning. Loneliness after 60 isn't eased by filling time. It's eased by sharing life. There's also a loneliness that comes from the loss of shared history. When you're younger, you're surrounded by people who remember earlier versions of you. There's shorthand, context, continuity. After 60, that shared history thins out. People who knew your younger self drift away or are no longer here. New connections don't carry the same context, and you may find yourself choosing not to explain your past at all. That absence of being known over time creates a specific kind of loneliness. Not about missing individuals, but missing continuity. Many men also notice that fewer people ask for their story. Your experiences haven't lost value, but they aren't always invited. You carry decades of insight, humor, resilience, and perspective that rarely get voiced simply because there's no obvious place to put them. That unshared interior world can feel isolating, even when others are present. Another truth is that many men after 60 are lonely because they've outgrown certain relationships but haven't yet grown into new ones. There's often an unspoken belief that friendship is something you establish earlier in life, not something you build now. That belief alone keeps many men isolated longer than they need to be. Yet some of the most meaningful connections of a man's life are formed later, when pretense drops and authenticity matters more than impression. Loneliness after 60 is not a personal failure. It's a structural reality of how modern life treats aging men. Fewer built-in communities, fewer social rituals, fewer invitations into emotional space. Understanding this doesn't fix everything, but it removes shame. And shame is often what keeps loneliness silent. There is also hope in this stage of life that often goes unrecognized. Many men after 60 are more emotionally capable of connection than they ever were before. They're less reactive, more reflective, more patient. The skills for deep connection are often stronger now, even if the opportunities are fewer. That means loneliness isn't a dead end. It's a signal that connection still matters, a signal that inner life is still active, a signal that the desire for meaning hasn't disappeared. Talking about loneliness doesn't mean surrendering strength. It means redefining it. Strength after 60 isn't about carrying everything alone. It's about knowing when carrying alone no longer serves you. The loneliness men don't talk about after 60 doesn't mean something went wrong. It means you're still human, still wired for connection, still capable of depth, still deserving of being known. And acknowledging that, even quietly, is often the first step toward easing it. Not by fixing everything at once, not by forcing change, but by allowing connection to matter again. Not louder, not faster, not performative, but real. And real connection, even later in life, still has the power to soften loneliness in ways nothing else can.